Here we go again, time for yet another special bonus edition of the Paul Ryder tapes. I'm Angela Smith, I'm the ex-wife of Paul Ryder. He sat down with me in the months leading up to his death to tell his complete life story. He passed away suddenly in July of 2022, just 12 days after we finished recording. And then he went on to interview more than 40 people whose lives he'd touched, to drop into the main series, just snippets of those interviews. But everybody wanted more, so we decided to release those interviews in full in the form of bonus episodes. So that is what you're going to hear today, one of those interviews. This week's guest was at the sharp end of the Monday's machine in the very early days. He had a radio show on Manchester's Piccadilly Radio for 12 years, where he was championing the very best of the local bands, and he also worked as a record plugger for Factory Records and had the Mondays as one of the acts that he was plugging. So basically he was promoting the music, promoting the band and setting up interviews and generally spreading the word. He had his own PR firm, and also at one time he managed Peter Hook's solo project Revenge. So he was immersed in that scene. He's from Manchester but now lives in the US. His name is Tony Michaelides, but he's better known as the legendary Prince of the Pluggers and Titan of the Turntable. His DJ name, Tony the Greek.
My kind of pseudonym is Tony the Greek, so I did my own radio show for 12 and a half years. And the reason I got it was I banged on the program controller's door. I said, I just saw the program schedule. He put Becky Want on. It was on in the day, playing the same stuff they were playing in the day. I said, listen, I live here and I work here. I said, do you know who comes from this city? And I started reeling off everything from Graham Nash to, to like the Buzzcocks, blah, 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 everyone, right up to Simply Red and Oasis,
Yeah.
And I said, can you not find 3 hours a week on a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week radio station to play up and coming bands and indie music? And he just looked at me and said, why don't you do it? And I said, fuck it, I will do it. And I walked out, and I'd never done a mobile disco or a wedding or a bar mitzvah in my life. And all of a sudden, I'm broadcasting the biggest station outside of London. Can I just ask you a question after what you sent me and everything? How did you deal with all that?
With what? The drug thing?
Heroin and...
how did you deal with it? How did
I mean, did you just go right back from when you were together? Because obviously that period of, the whole Madchester thing.
Well, I dealt with it because I always believed, and I think I was right, that he really wanted to stop. And so it wasn't like he'd ever just been a heroin addict and was like, fuck it, this is what I'm going to do. So there was always a desire to stop, and there was continued efforts to stop. So I lost count of how many rehabs he went into. He went to Eric Clapton's clinic in Antigua twice. And he'd go, and twice he went to Eric Clapton's clinic in Antigua, and both times he came back and used crack the next day. It's just like disaster. I mean, but there were times that there were enough sober times within that period and that's what kept me going. I just believed that eventually he would crack it because he kept trying, and I really believed he had a desire to stop. And then when we moved to LA, he did have a really long period of being clean. He managed to stay clean for a long time. He was in rehab, and then he did an outpatient program. But what they did was they put him on a lot of psychiatric meds. So he's on a lot of prescription drugs and anti-anxiety, antidepressants. So I never felt like he was totally clean, like he wasn't using street drugs and he wasn't drinking alcohol. So even those years were not perfect. It wasn't like, oh, I've got my husband back now. And we ended up breaking. We were together for 17 years. So, we had some good times within that. But I just really believed he was, deep down, he was a really good person, and we had some really good times. We had 2 kids together. I think if I'd not had kids with him, I wouldn't have stayed as long as I did and put up with as much as I did. I just wanted it to work, you know. And
but listening to him, he sounded fine just on what you sent me. You know, it was like it was listening to a couple of people like who'd got back together and were reminiscing nice things about days gone by.
We go really big on all the bad stuff too, and I call him out on all the infidelities, and some episodes are like he's wincing really badly. This isn't all just stories of meeting celebrities and being a rock and roll star and on the road. It's all the dark stuff as well, which I think makes it more poignant, really, because
that'll help, and especially in the times we live with mental illness. There's seeking help and there's getting the right help. Not the first time I've been on the other side of seeing what's happened to people with drug abuse and things.
Yeah.
It was more than just ecstasy, because I mean the whole thing with the Hacienda closing down, I mean it was people at the door with the drug barons, weren't they? Like the dealers.
Yeah, it was controlled by the gangs in the end, wasn't it?
They'd walk up to the door and it'd just be like, you know, the guy'd open his like jacket and he'd have a gun in it. The doorman got to know them, so they just let him in. But that's where they went in. They sold the drugs. So it was totally out of control. And the other thing is, because everybody's taking ecstasy, they didn't sell
the alcohol. I know. I've mentioned before that there's a really funny video on YouTube made for BBC Schools. If you just type in the search Happy Mondays BBC Schools, it'll come up. And it was a piece done for schools all about the business of the Happy Mondays. And you'll actually see Tony Michaelides in that piece tackling Tony Wilson, complaining about the Mondays not showing up for interviews. You were the regional PR person for the Monday. Yeah. You worked for Factory.
I worked all the Mondays, yeah.
Right. So did you rub shoulders with them very much? I mean, you must have had a lot to do with them.
The thing is, they didn't do a lot of promotion. I was taking them into Piccadilly to do an interview. But the interviews with the Mondays were like, they'd ask a question, it was like, yeah, right, sorted. So they're not like the greatest interview on earth. And when Tony came into my office, you have to work with these people.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I was trying to say to Tony, you know, if I arrange an interview for them and they're wasted and they don't turn up, and I'm sorry, but my reputation's on the line as well. Right. It's like, well, I came in early to interview these fuckers and they didn't turn up. Yeah. So I'm trying to say, listen, if you're going to do something, be professional and do it, because believe it or not, that will be broadcast to a people of your fans. And you will sell records off the back of it. And if you piss about and you know, you cancel it or you don't turn up and stuff, they're not going to invite you back. And
did you ever say this to the band themselves, or was it just to Tony? Did you ever like tackle them?
I said it to Tony and I said it to Nathan, you know, as well at the same time. But the thing is, they liked that about them. It made it kind of different, but it worked at the time. But I knew that they would never break America.
Do you feel like they didn't really break through because of their attitude to the press? Like what?
Well, I think the thing is that what works in England doesn't work in America. Independent promotion in the regions didn't exist before me. Right. I'm not bragging, don't get me wrong. I'm just being factual. And then I got a radio show with no experience in radio. And that's what frustrated me with Piccadilly, a power source that has the opportunity to play emerging bands.
Did you ever have the Mondays on your radio show? Like on in person?
Not personally, but I did take him in to do what was my show at the time. It just happened to be in that period when David Dunn was on doing it. What I don't want to do is sound like I'm putting a downer on things, but the Mondays are like a law unto themselves. So they're not daytime, right? And you have to get them on the, you know, the specialist shows, because those are only listened to by record buyers anyway. Right. So I was working other bands like the Pixies and the Stone Roses and, you know, and the Factory stuff. So it was a very important avenue, because the people that would listen to what was my show, and at that time, the one you saw was David's, the only people who listen to those shows are potential record buyers. So if you would try and have a conversation with them, it would be that Manx swagger.
I think that was, because I've asked myself this question a few times. I worked at MTV in 1990. It was during the time that the Mondays were just about to break through, and I did a piece on them. We went to Iceland when they did a gig there, and they were promoting the Hallelujah EP that had just been released.
Yeah.
It was just before Step On. So I liked them, and I was championing them to MTV. And MTV News agreed to do a piece on them. So I was all excited. Bez and Shaun came in to do this interview. And it was the most painful and embarrassing interview that I've ever witnessed. I was mortified. It was like one-word answers. Yeah.
So you understand what I'm saying?
And I didn't know, and I still don't know to this day, was that an act, or was that just them not knowing what to say and not having been schooled in how to deal with the press, or did they just not really give a fuck about how they came across? But was it deliberate? Was it part of a plan? Was it like...
When your manager and your label head loves it, you don't really have to change. It didn't matter what I had to say. My comments were professional, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm trying to build, I'm trying to build my own credibility and everything.
Were you embarrassed representing them then and dealing with them?
I wasn't embarrassed, but I wasn't going to change and be sloppy like they were, because you said that, right? And when they went in, nice to meet you. David's been personable. Nice to see you guys. Sit down. They get the mic levels, and they're sat there like that in the chair, And I think the first question was like, you're welcome to have Bez and Shaun from the Happy Mondays. And I think something like one of his first one or two questions was, how come did you come to sign for Factory Records? Nobody else wanted us. Well, it is kind of funny, but
it reminds you of the Sex Pistols, the famous Sex Pistols clip, wasn't it? Like, but that really worked to launch the Sex Pistols. So I just wonder, was there an element of...
New Order weren't a lot different, because when they got Top of the Pops, I mean, I was there. When they got Top of the Pops and they wanted to play live. And they said, well, we don't play live. He said, well, we're going to play live. So, well, you won't be on the show. He said, well, fine, we won't be on the show, So they were the first band to go and do Top of the Pops, play Blue Monday live, and the record dropped. You weren't expected to go up the charts.
Yeah.
But the point is, at that stage where you're getting known and stuff, it's really important, because other people talk, I mean, if somebody knew that guy from the station and say, don't fucking talk to them, and buggers, they got anything to say. And it's a small industry when it comes to that. And when you talk about like stuff like that, it's like I felt that after it, I had to apologize to David, and he was a friend. I didn't have to. He said, oh, don't worry about it, so it's fine, But the thing is, it's a thing with Manchester in a way as well, because the Roses aren't very articulate at talking. And the thing is, with the only person in New Order who's articulate is Ucky, right? And Ucky was always a good interview, so he was kind of the band's spokesman. But if you'd have put the others in, it wouldn't have been a great interview. So I don't think, unless they're in front of the microphone, they can sell themselves. I mean, Paul, God rest his soul, is about as articulate as you get in the Happy Mondays. He's like the Harvard one, isn't he?
Thinking about it, I have to disagree with Tony there, because I think this series has proved that if they'd only just spoken to the other members of the band, namely Rowetta, namely Mark Day, namely Gaz Whelan, namely Paul Ryder, and even Paul Davis, you would have found that there were actually people in the Mondays that are pretty captivating when they get behind a microphone.
I'll tell you what I loved. I mean, I know, like, you obviously had a strong bond and you had kids together and everything, but the way you were talking to him was great, because you could see there was times he paused and you reminded him of certain things.
Yeah.
And I think you got the Paul Ryder that you fell in love with, that you managed to bring out. And I think anybody else trying to do it might have swayed him in more a Mondays mode,
Right.
Why didn't? Here's a classic question. After what I heard just in 20 minutes, why wasn't he the spokesman for the band? Doesn't have to be the singer or
he didn't like doing it. I think he was just comfortable talking to me. If it had been anyone else doing this, he wouldn't have been as open. Is it the fault then of the management and the record company for not schooling them, or is that not just part of what the deal was? Like, they weren't with a major label, they weren't manufactured, they weren't styled. Like, is that not just all part of that punk type approach?
All I can say to that, Angela, it was the right time for a band like that. The journalists loved Factory, so they would always write great reviews about them because it wasn't a business, it was a vibe, it was a culture. Factory was just the same. Those records weren't daytime records, so unless they were top 5 or something and commercial already had to play them, they wouldn't even get in daytime on they'd get like Kid Jensen or Peter Powell or stuff like that in London and stuff, but they weren't like daytime friendly. They might want to get wasted rather than go and do an interview. Right. But when you come in with that kind of swagger, to some people who you don't know as well as I knew David, might think it might come over as arrogance.
Do you think it was arrogance?
I think it was swagger.
Right. Yeah.
In as much as, like, top, sorted. I think it's important for a band culturally to be out of an area that people would, anything at that time, and I'm not saying in a derogatory way to the Mondays, but anything that was a band that came from Manchester would have been heard by a record company in those days because of New Order, because of the Smiths, because of the Stone Roses. But the interesting thing about it, I mean, just mentioning the Charlatans, the Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, New Order, they're all different. They don't sound the same. There would be a lot of reasons a major label wouldn't have signed the Mondays, because you have to be able to work with people. So when they're in the studio, if they're arriving wasted and you're paying for a producer and a studio and nothing gets done, there's going to be friction, and the A&R guy's going to worry about losing his job because the MD's pissed off with who are these people you've signed type thing. Nathan did an admirable job because he was kind of part of the gang, in as much as he understood the for want of a better word, psychology of them. You talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, that was an important part of their life. The Mondays had a couldn't give a fuck attitude, but at the same time, they released records that people liked, and they were played in like the dance clubs as well. That whole thing, Manchester was responsible for a lot of that. People were just, drugs. Listen, there's always been drugs. You take drugs away from Woodstock, it's a different gig. Just a different drug, Shaun was never going to be like top vocalist in the UK. I mean, but that's not what they were about. They were about like a culture. And I'll tell you one thing that I'll never forget. I went to see him at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. Obviously, it was a sold out. You could have picked any 5 people out of the audience and put them on stage, and it would have been the same band. They all looked the same. Yeah. It was almost like Bowie. When everybody went to see Ziggy, they all looked like Ziggy Stardust.
Right.
So people bought into the whole kind of culture of what they look like.
Question for you, though. You say that everyone in the audience looked like them. Is that because the people in the audience had copied them, or is it because everybody was dressing like that and they were just representative of the crowd?
I think the Mondays had a lot to do with people's appearances, because like I mentioned Bowie then, but I remember going to gigs. I was the odd one out because I just had jeans and a t-shirt on, and people were like, with the Ziggy mark on the cheek and stuff like that. So they bought into the whole package. And like, I think the thing with Monday was that there was always a strong affection for them. And that was the great thing, although they weren't a punk band, that was the great thing about punk. Anybody could get on stage and do it. And I think in a way, subliminally, that had an effect on me, because I thought, well, if I can get on the radio, anybody can. Right. It's not like I'm going to run around saying, hey, guess, I'm a DJ. I wasn't a DJ. I was just a guy who played great records, But I think the thing is, I think their audience grew up with them.
Right.
And they would buy anything. And if it was a Mondays t-shirt or something like that. So everything to do with them. But even to the extent of the way they talked in a swaggerish, like sorted top way, people would almost that kind of hero worship of a pop star. Yeah. No matter what type of music you kind of want to be in. They're in a very powerful position because they've got a voice and they can be heard. So because Mondays were selling, it's so funny actually, because that is the only Bummed Up There is the only Factory record I've got on disc. I didn't even know I had it until I just looked at it the other day. And
I can see it. Yeah, I can see it.
Because Factory weren't members of the BPI. So they didn't So they didn't have like the little flags on and stuff. It's really weird. And thinking that, but that says 60,000 albums. I mean, 60,000 albums now would be like, biggest album in the world.
Right.
But the thing is, they built up, a solid fan base. But then again, the way they were allowed to, let's use this word because it serves the purpose, indulge, right? Why do you take Bez, who dances on stage and doesn't contribute anything to recording? Why the fuck do you take him to the Bahamas?
They went to Barbados.
Barbados. It's not really worth the plane fare, is it?
Well, they would probably argue that it was because of the vibe and,
Well, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. But what I'm saying is there's a certain amount of getting away with it because they're happy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They didn't kind of push it in as much as that they were probably always used to getting away with it.
Right.
They knew Tony and Nathan were not trying to null what they loved about them.
And if they hadn't been allowed to get away with it, I think we wouldn't have had the music from them that we had, because they would have been shut down. They would have rebelled. They would have walked off. They would have broken up. In the hands of a major label, they would have imploded really quickly, I think.
The thing is about the Mondays is that the right band at the right time. For a city like Manchester, it was a culture, it was a vibe, and it was people. I would see Nathan in 48 Printer Street, but there was no point talking to Nathan about what you thought might be a good idea for the Happy Mondays, because it wouldn't have been something that would have been worth him talking to him about, because he knew enough to know that this isn't going to sink in.
Yeah.
Because business as usual was going pretty well, especially like that free trade hall gig and things. When people walked out, they were smiling, they were happy, they had a great night out. So they were a great form of entertainment, the Mondays. And the whole drug thing, not that I'm defending it, it's just part of the makeup. It was like people put big straight stage production. They just have some guy that you wonder if he's going to fall over at any minute and fall on the singer, or Shaun drops the mic or anything. It was one of those kind of anything could happen. They played well live, yeah. I mean, the sound was good. I mean, that's like 2,000 people or something close on, and they'd sold out, so they were already successful. It wasn't like they were learning. I mean, they Paul was a good player.
And Tony was the infamous PR person that, if you've seen that BBC Schools documentary that's floating around on YouTube from back in the day, he was having a chat with Tony Wilson expressing his views about the Mondays not necessarily being the most reliable band to do PR for.
I admire Nathan and Tony for the way this is what we do. And we never had, I mean, if you look at the thing on the film that the Happy Mondays BBC educational thing, when Tony comes in and says, "I believe you're not happy with the boys," something. Well, we weren't in an argument. It's like, sit down, and I'm just explaining the whole thing to him, saying, and it's just the case for the defence.
Was there any change that happened as a result of you having that conversation with him? Was that faked for the cameras, or was that a genuine conversation?
Oh God, no. I never asked him, but maybe he just said, "Oh, follow me. I'm going to see our promotions guy." It was a situation where we need to talk, and it was just a case of, I don't want to beat myself up for not having the audience with Tony Wilson, but saying, "Tony, let me just tell you, this doesn't go down great in regional radio. Listen, regional radio, a lot of the time, honestly, Angela, it's there to satisfy advertisers and to play non-offensive music. Yeah. So if there's anything disruptive, I mean, for instance, if you walked in, there's secretaries, there's normal people working in there. Yeah. And if there was a little bit of disruption and people walked in and smoking a joint and there's that would be on me, because they're never going to see the band again.
So did it have any impact at all on the behaviour going forward after you'd had that conversation?
No, I think the Mondays were a constant. I mean, they were very much like they were a tribe. Yeah. And whatever it is with the tribes generate followings. Yeah. And like I said to you, the audience that was in the Free Trade Hall that night, Bez is in the audience as well, because there's people like, it's like, normally you'd pick him away and say, "Oh, we need to take him out and sit him down. He's not very well." But the thing is, all these years, listen, I'm an old bloke. I'm not going to defend anything. It was an amazing time that they had such an impact in what they did on so many people. It was interesting to be there and see, like, you know, how it evolved and stuff. Right band, right place, right time. And I think honestly, I knew Tony Wilson obviously a lot better than the Happy Mondays. But I think the thing is, knowing Tony, I bet he was kind of the lead conspirator. I bet he was, you know, pulling the strings as if to say, like, a bit more of this, guys, a bit more of that, you know. Right. There was a good camaraderie with Factory. And yeah. Tony was a great guy. There would have been a lot of people that wouldn't have been happy with him, and maybe they sacked somebody and got rid of somebody else or this and that. But they wouldn't have been the band with the legacy that they have without the infrastructure around them. Right manager, right label, right lead singer, right bass player. Every piece of the pie was perfect, I think, for a band like that. Just talking about them now is kind of like tingly, because there's nothing like music to take you back to a time and a place. When you reached out to me, Angela, and told me what you were doing, I really admire things like that. I mean, obviously there's a personal connection, but the thing is, I feel in my own little world that I'm doing that with some of the people that I worked, because I always say there's a generation of people growing up that have never had it to miss it. And when I saw what you were putting together, what Paul said, it's like, you know, you can't have that effect. He's not trying to impress you. He's just, I like authenticity. And in the same way that Bowie is the real deal, so are the Happy Mondays in what they do. They're not being anything other than they're not. They're just a bunch of kids swaggering around, getting off their faces. Yeah. You know? They were in the moment, having a great time, and they had a perfect label for them.
Yeah.
That would cater to their every need, i.e. allow their indulgence.
That's all we've got for you this week. We're playing out with the acoustic version of the very first Big Arm single, Flashbacks, which was actually recorded for a radio show that Big Arm did around the time of the single release. I hope I've got this right, but I think it is Danny Short on the bass, who's actually the drummer for Big Arm, and I'm pretty sure it's Daz Gilkinson on guitar. It's really, really good. We've got a couple of acoustic versions of Big Arm songs, and they're going to be on the new compilation album that we're putting together, which is a collection of Paul's songs from an array of different collaborators, coming soon. We've got some more Q&A Zooms coming up, so if you'd like to join in with one or more, please do join our Patrons Club by going to patreon.com/the Paul Ryder Tapes. We're so grateful to our amazing patrons for helping us to bring these episodes to you. We really couldn't do it without you. We also have a WhatsApp group, so email me via the socials or website if you'd like to join. The website is paulryder.tv. Have a really brilliant week. We're going to be back next week, same time, same place, with yet another special bonus edition, and it's going to be a cracker, so don't miss that. Big thanks to the legendary Tony Michaelides, and of course, as usual, to the man himself, the late and the great Paul Anthony Ryder. See you next week. Lots of love.
Remind me of you, and when you hear it, you'll know it too. Flashbacks, I'm having flashbacks. Flashbacks, oh flashbacks. Flashbacks, I'm having flashbacks. Flashbacks, oh flashbacks. Pop, ba da ba da 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 pop. You spin me round like a spinning top, 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 top. I taught you things you never knew. Flashbacks, I'm having flashbacks. Flashbacks, oh flashbacks.
Glistening Productions.